Misinformation or recollective degradation. Let's begin with a definition. Psychological surgeons Bernard and Reyna define false memories to be those that form when individuals experience a strong recollection of events that never actually took place in their own lives. This is becoming such a threat because misinformation has the ability to shift people's individual memories of an event. Continuing this, health science and media reporter Bridget Murray-Law recounts that in studies about the O.J. Simpson trial, President Nixon's resignation, and the Challenger explosion, participants often related augmented facts about each event. This is because the events had large amounts of misinformation circulating around them, and this is what can be concluded to have caused these events' ambiguity and high false memory creation rate. But why are false memories so harmful? Well, American litigator Rachel Greenspan and American psychologist Elizabeth Loftus explain that misinformation can muddle human thoughts and cause disorientation. Additionally, false memories often replace individual memories, which translates to memory loss. And finally, Bridget Murray-Law explains that in media booms, people make flashbulb memories, which are highly detailed memories that can be recalled down to the tiny details. Examples of this are the JFK assassination and the terrorist attack on 9/11. The boldness of these memories in the human mind can create an excess amount of emotional trauma for victims of the event. Now, to tie my topic into the stimulus material, I first looked at Johann Norberg's False Nostalgia, in which he examines the United States' collective rosy memory about the 1950s, because of facts that have been presented since this actual period itself. This can be compared to 9/11, O.J. Simpson, and the Challenger, because all of these events had mass media and facts circulating them that actually shifted their viewpoints. Misinformation in the recent digitized years has only extremely heightened this phenomenon. I additionally looked into Deborah Paradis's Selenidad for her definition of memory circuits, which are ideas of historical influence that coexist with hopes for the future. This can be tied to 9/11, a really significant flashbulb event. Victims of 9/11 have a collective memory about the event, and this creates a memory circuit, which then also leads to group trauma and group misremembering. Now, all of this background information leads us to the problem. Misinformation creates harmful false memories. But before going into my research, I initially asked, to what extent do social media created false memories negatively affect human lives? And because of all of my findings, I have concluded that because misinformation on social media enables harmful false memory creation, it is a large threat that needs to be addressed. My first piece of evidence is that misinformation makes true versus false memories hard to distinguish, and this is furthered by Norman Vasu, a senior fellow and deputy head at the Center for National Security, and his team. They explain that the mix of both credible and uncredible information online causes individuals to have a much harder time judging what is correct and incorrect, which is what can be translated to the false memory production online. Additionally, Bridget Murray-Law, in her report about flashbulb memories, explains that because these memories are so bold in the human mind, people can even recall their emotional reactions to said event. But as surveyed 10 years after 9/11, many Americans had actually misremembered their emotional reactions to the attack. This means that victims often remembered emotional traumas that they never actually experienced. And this led to amounts of unnecessary trauma that could have been solved if the misinformation, especially the mass media surrounding 9/11, had been reduced. Now, it is important to note that some people argue that humans are naturally susceptible to some memory loss, and Norman Vasu and his team run with this claim. They say that people are predisposed to some memory loss, but then they also concede that misinformation is what is largely expanding the false memory creation online. Now, companies have already started trying to solve the misinformation problem, firstly through fact-checking. Sadly, though, researchers Fernandez and Alani claim that this cannot solve the misinformation problem completely, because these warnings do not go beyond the simple presentation of visual warning boxes that caution users about potentially false information. Additionally, some legal restrictions have been pursued against misinformation, but in the end they all conflict with First Amendment rights. There is a fine line between reducing misinformation and upholding freedom of speech. So because of these restrictions, researchers have had to be very careful when proposing their own solutions to misinformation. But respected lawyers Rubenstein and Kenneth have identified 3 types of speech regulation they believe can help combat misinformation by going further than a warning box and without impinging freedom of speech. They are collateral censorship, prior restraint, and public and private cooperation. Additionally, PhD student Lucas Constantinou suggests posting wait times, which have in study already proved to make people reformulate or even abandon their posts while in the waiting queue. These components together are making up a solution that researchers are calling soft regulation. And although in its infancy, soft regulation is already proving itself to be a powerful tool in reducing misinformation online. Although it is good, soft regulation is not a perfect solution because in the end it cannot actually eliminate misinformation. It would only largely reduce it. And it is heavily reliant on media companies cooperating and implementing soft regulation into their platforms, because if they refuse to do so, the solution in its entirety would be ineffective. Now, to implement soft regulations, all platforms would have to take action, because if only some platforms agree to soft regulation, social media users could still be largely harmed by misinformation just from it being on one other social media site. And users would have to be okay with using social media that has soft regulation placed over it. Now, some people might find it annoying to have to wait to post their simple Instagram story, but truly, if we do want to address misinformation, social media users have to be okay with some change coming about. So, in conclusion, misinformation is a large issue because of how it creates false memories. False memories are harmful because they cause disorientation, memory loss, and excess trauma. So first, we need to be mindful of our own social media consuming and posting habits, and we really need to push for the implementation of soft regulation.
Very good. Okay. What information did you need that you weren't able to find or locate?
I do think a lot of more specific examples could have strengthened my argument. A lot of my sources were more general because I think my topic is fairly new. The majority of my sources were post-COVID, so in the last 5 years, and a lot of them just touched on the borderline effects of how misinformation creates false memories, but not a whole lot of examples of like specific events. I think I really would have liked to see a whole article on just COVID or a whole article on the Challenger, for example, but there just wasn't a lot of those resources out there.
Okay, good. And how did you use conclusions or questions of others to advance your own research?
Well, initially when researching, I was just looking for a tie between misinformation and memory, and I specifically remember one source that claimed that witnesses in when they are testifying, if they were exposed to misinformation, it would shift their memory of the event. So that, I think, is initially what got me to think, oh, I could tie misinformation into affecting memory, specifically false memories. And so that initial article really helped launch my research into the direction it went.